Flower Child is a very, very funny episode of Frasier, but also a very sentimental and thought-provoking one too. This is the fourth episode of the second season, directed by the wonderful James Burrows, and it starts off with everybody in the taxi, well, Niles, Martin, and Frasier, and the taxi driver goes into labour. And it sparks Niles starting to think about parenthood and the fact that he thinks he wants to become a father. So Frasier mentions this thing that they often do with teenagers, and I'd never heard of this, but it makes a lot of sense when you think about it, where they have to carry a bag of flour around and care for it like it were a child. And I feel like nowadays they're more likely to use those dolls that actually cry and demand things, so it's a little bit more realistic. But I also feel like a bag of flour is going to be very difficult to keep intact. As we learn with Niles, Niles actually carries this rather large, heavy looking bag of flour around, and it just gets increasingly funny. But it is also very moving as we see Niles going through these very real thoughts about the fact that he is getting older, he might want children, and he's kind of conflicted with his own thoughts. And there are a few bits that I thought were particularly moving and some that were particularly funny, so I'll talk about that with a spoiler warning in a moment, as I don't want to give away too much of the detail. We also have a narrative where Frasier has signed a card, thinking it's a birthday card, and it's actually a get well card. And the message he wrote is not very appropriate for somebody who's in hospital, but I won't say any more than that. That part of the narrative, although entertaining enough, felt definitely like padding, like it was just something there to break up the main narrative with Niles, which is absolutely fine. But for me, I could take or leave it. It wasn't the most interesting, but it was absolutely fine. But for me, definitely most, if not all of the comedy, all of the entertainment came from Niles, and I rather enjoyed it. So, a few spoiler thoughts now. One thing that I found found to be really funny, and one that I thought was very well done. And the funny thing is when at this point the bag of flour barely resembles a bag of flour. It's an absolute mess. And Niles sets it down on the sofa. He asks Martin to watch the baby, and Martin very bluntly just says no. And the next thing we know, Eddie is ripping the baby to shreds, or the bag of flour, and it's just so funny and so well done, and absolutely adorable. On the flip side, with this part of the story, the final shot we have of Niles it's not funny, but it's very moving. And it's when he's in the hospital looking at the baby, or the babies through the window, and Frasier's there. Then Frasier walks away, and for a beat, for a second, 2 seconds at the most, all we see is Niles looking quite pensive as he looks down at the babies. And in that moment, I think his inner confusion is very clear. And it was just really moving. And then, of course, we have a bit of comedy to end it with Daphne and Martin and the flower. And I'm so upset that they cut, at least on Paramount, on Amazon Prime. I'm not sure if this is where it actually cuts, but on Paramount, it cuts the second before we see Daphne dumping the flower on Martin's head. I would have loved to have seen that in full, but honestly, it was tremendous fun. The whole episode is generally very funny, but as I said, with some more sentimental and thought-provoking moments at the right times and lasting for the right length of time as well. So it's a very entertaining episode. Niles is just so fantastic, and this episode really helps to show why that's the case. Really brilliant episode. We'll always be happy to watch it. Definitely a very thought-provoking one as well.